for introduction. Now I have to live up to it. Okay. So, first of all, you gave me credit as having a global perspective, and then you also said a personal perspective or something like that. He knows the global perspective. He knows people. So I want to make a comment and a correction. The correction I'll do first, which is it's not mine. I don't know that I have a unique worldview. Or I probably do, but I try not to use it. The worldview that I try to make use of is the worldview that the Lubavitcher Rebbe selflessly gave of himself to teach to me and to whomever else wants to learn it. So that's the first thing. It's not me. It's not my perspective. It's the Rebbe's perspective. The second thing is the comment. And the comment is, I think that you hit upon a great paradox. The great paradox is, a paradox is something which seems like a contradiction at first glance, but upon further examination, it is actually a higher truth. And that is that global is personal and personal is global. That's the paradox. The paradox is that big is small and small is big. And what do I mean by that? There was a fellow who was davening, he was talking to God, and he said, God, how long is 1,000 years for you? And God says, 1,000 years in my eyes is just a day. And he says, God, how much is everyone hearing me, by the way? I hear there's talking.
Yeah, if all groups can please mute their phone, the class.
We hear you.
I know you hear me, but I also hear you. So then I start listening more closely and seeing if I'm supposed to be responding to a question or something like that. At any rate, if you can mute. If not, I'll try to. I don't want to mute my computer because then if you have something really important to say, I won't hear it. Well, you know what? I am going to mute it. I'll mute my sound so I won't be able to hear. And if you really need my attention, you're going to have to get it visually. All right, fine. So I muted my sound. I can't hear anything. If you really need me, jump up in the air and wave your arms. Okay, so anyways, there's this guy, and he's talking to God, and he says, God, how long is 1,000 years for you? And God says, for me, 1,000 years is a minute. 1,000 years is just a minute. Wow, God, 1,000 years is a minute. He says, God, how much for you is $1 million? God says, $1 million for me is just a penny. Really? $1 million just a penny. The guy says, God, can I have a penny? And God says, sure, wait 1 minute. We all know that infinity means bigger than big. Infinity is bigger than big. But that's just one side of infinity. Infinity has two sides. Infinity is also smaller than small. So if you think about the infinity of the universe, let's say, it's not just that you can go out into space and galaxy after galaxy and it's just endless and it's unfathomably large. But also, you can turn on the microscope and you can start looking into things and you see that everything, the table in front of you is made of molecules, which are made of atoms, which are made of subatomic particles, and you can infinitely zoom in as well. So infinity isn't just bigger than big, it's smaller than small. We have a hard time talking about God because God is indescribable. One of the things we can say about God is that God is infinite. So when we say that somebody has a godly perspective on life, what we're really saying is they have an infinite perspective. And when we say they have an infinite perspective, what we're really saying is that they can see bigger than big and smaller than small. And I think that is one of the things that we learn from the Rebbe's approach to leadership is that big is small, small is big. What does that mean? It means, first of all, nothing's too big. No agenda is too unapproachable. So the Rebbe made it his mission. He devoted his life to nothing less than the perfection of the world peace. Okay, you want to talk about setting the bar high. Bigger than big. But the approach, the implementation, we know that Rebbe's famous quality of connecting to individuals, of keeping track of individuals, of knowing about the particulars of their lives, of not overlooking any meticulous detail, and having that personal connection to so many. And really, that's one and the same thing. There's a story that's told. There was a little boy who wanted to play with his father, but his father was a big, important guy. He was so big and important that it wasn't enough that he worked 90 hours a week, but then he had a home office where he brought his work home. It was one Sunday morning, the little boy wanted to play with his father, and he ran into the father's home office, and the father said, I'm doing big, important things. And the little boy said, but I want to play with you. And the father said, okay, no problem. I'll play with you in just a minute. Here, take this. And the father took a magazine. He had a magazine lying on the coffee table there in his office. And on the cover of the magazine, there was a globe. It was a picture of the world with all the different borders and countries. And the father started tearing the cover of the magazine into tiny little pieces like confetti. And then he took the little boy's hand and he put these torn up pieces into the little boy's hand. And he said, look, it's a puzzle. Go do the puzzle. And when you're finished with the puzzle, I'll come play with you. Now, the father was really doing it just to get rid of the kid. He knew that this little boy did not know what the world looks like and all the different countries and all their different boundaries and borders. So he figured this will keep the boy busy for a good long time. He hands the boy the torn up pieces, tells him this is the puzzle. Go put together the picture of the world. 5 minutes later, the little boy's running back into the father's room. He says, Daddy, come. I finished the puzzle. Now we can play. Father says, no, that's not possible. You couldn't finish the puzzle. He says, yes, I did. Come see. And he goes into the other room and he sees on the dining room table, the little boy has, sure enough, the entire front cover of that magazine reassembled. Perfect picture of the world. Father can't believe it. He says, how did you do it? Little boy says, it's actually very easy, Daddy. The trick is very easy. You see, I don't know what the world looks like, but that front cover of the magazine has a back as well, has an advertisement. And in the advertisement, it was a picture of a man. And I don't know what the world looks like, but I know what a man looks like. So I just took each piece and I just looked at the back. And what do you know? When you put the man together, the whole world falls into place. This was very much the Rebbe's approach. If you can put the individual together, if you can inspire one person, if you can make one man or woman or even a child to realize their own potential, that is global. That is Mashiach. That is a perfected world. One person, one individual at a time. I want to talk a little bit more about this because it's not just the idea of being able to see the small picture, but particularly the human element of seeing the small picture. You know, there are people who are good at details. They're good at granular little details, but they're not necessarily persons, or however you make the plural of that. And then there's a specific skill, a specific approach, which is a global vision that has to do with seeing the details, but details in people. In other words, being a real master of human resources, knowing how to bring out the greatness in each person. And our tradition tells us really that's what a Jewish leader is. Going all the way back to the first leaders, there's a medrash that tells us about how God selected Moses to be the first leader of the Jewish people and to bring them out of Egypt. We know Moses had a funny resume, funny CV. When God picked him to be the redeemer of the Jewish people and take them out of slavery in Egypt, what was his job experience? What internship did Moses have? Well, you know, we know that he fled Egypt after he took a stand for justice, and he was gone. He was for 40 years, he was in Midian. And what was he doing during those 40 years? He was a shepherd. He worked with sheep. And the Medrash tells us that when he dealt with his sheep, it wasn't just a flock of sheep, just one size fits all treatment. But God observed how Moses would feed the older, tougher sheep with tough grass, and he would feed the smaller, more gentle sheep with soft grass. And that when one sheep would break away from the flock, Moses would go walking after it and bring back that one sheep. And God said, that's the quality that I want for the leader of my people. And that's why we find all the great Jewish leaders always had that job qualification in their background, from Moses to King David. King David also, he was an actual shepherd. He dealt with sheep. And again, the idea is that ability not just to see the micro and how the micro fits into the macro, but the human element of the micro, putting the man together so that the world falls into place. I'll tell you a story that happened to me a few years ago on Gimel Tammuz, on the Rebbe's Yortzeit, which is coming up again in just a couple of weeks. A few years ago, I was in Australia, and I was speaking about the Rebbe's leadership. I was speaking about how the Rebbe, similar themes to what I'm discussing with you now, about how the Rebbe really challenged everyone he met to discover their own greatness. And after I was done speaking, a fellow comes over to me and he says, I want to tell you my story. It was a very interesting story. Long story short, he's from a German Jewish family. His family came over to Australia from Germany, and very much, from the modern intellectual, rationalistic type tradition. And he says, I started studying with Chabad when I was in college, and my father, being a good, rational German Jew, was terrified that I was becoming religious. So he sent me for deprogramming. He said he sent me to Jerusalem to my illustrious uncle, the professor of Kabbalistic studies, Gershon Sholem. I don't know if you know who Gershon Sholem was, but if you pick up any book in a regular library, not in a Jewish library, on Kabbalah, it's usually Gershon Sholem. He was the professor at Hebrew University in the studies of Kabbalah, as just purely as an academic endeavor, not as Torah study, not as anything that's holy, but just as an academic discipline. So, and he was a very big rationalist and a very, to say the least, he was, Gershon Sholem was not from the biggest, I'll say, in a revealed level, he wasn't from the biggest believers. So at any rate, this guy tells me that his father is all worried about him, that he's becoming religious, and he sends him to Jerusalem to go meet with his illustrious uncle, the professor of Kabbalistic studies, Gershon Sholem, and to become deprogrammed. So he says at one point in their meeting, his uncle says to him, do you even know the secret of Lubavitch? And he says, I knew that when he was asking me this, he was basically figuring out if I'm smart enough to even be saved. He said, my uncle was an intellectual snob. So basically, he was asking me this question to figure out if my answer is even smart enough to deem me worthy of deprogramming. And if I wouldn't answer smart enough, he would just, just leave me as I am. So I knew I had to answer very, very cleverly. So I thought about it. He said, do you even know the secret of Lubavitch? So I said, yeah. They have a general. And he said, my uncle, the great scholar, was visibly impressed. He nodded and he smiled. Not bad. They have a general. But obviously, not to be outdone, he corrected me and he said, no. He has an army. He has an army. That was the story that this fellow told me in Australia. That struck me. There are a lot of leaders, whether you call them a general or a king or a CEO, but the indication of the greatness of a leader has nothing really to do with the leader. On paper, you could be the world's greatest leader. What distinguishes great leadership from any other kind of leadership? It really only has to do with their followers. Do they have an army? Have they mobilized people, real people, thinking people, feeling people who are so inspired and enthused by the leader's message that these people are willing to give their lives? They're willing to devote their lives to carrying out this mission. So you can have a great leader, but if he hasn't inspired people to devote their lives to carrying out the leader's vision, that's not a great leader. He has an army. And what does it mean? At least to me, how do I take that? That the Rebbe has an army? Is that everyone that the Rebbe met, not just that the Rebbe would tell them what to do. In fact, I know very few stories of the Rebbe telling people what to do. That the Rebbe revealed to people what he sees. I think it was Jonathan Sachs who said that good leaders make followers and great leaders make leaders. So if the definition of the leader is the one who has the vision. So a leader who makes followers says, trust me on this. I see what I need to see. Here's how you're going to fit into it. Here's your role. You only need to know your role. But a great leader, one who makes leaders, if the leader is the visionary, that means he makes other visionaries. He gets other people to see what he sees. He gets other people to see what he sees. The Rebbe got people to see what the Rebbe sees. And specifically, this is what I want to focus on as one point more than any other thing. What did the Rebbe see? What talent do we know that the Rebbe had, which was a unique talent, a vision, an ability to see? The Rebbe saw the potential in people. The Rebbe saw the power in people. The Rebbe saw how little changes in an individual can lead to global change. So when I say that the Rebbe got people to see what he sees, what did the Rebbe get people to see? The Rebbe got people to see their own greatness. That's what it means he has an army. That's what it means, a leader that makes leaders. Or, in the words that if you'll indulge my reading of it, a visionary who makes other visionaries. A visionary who sees the greatness in others and gets others to see that same greatness in themselves. I'll tell you that there was a story about a very successful Jewish businessman. Anyone who has been in England, especially in London, you surely know the name of Freddie Hager, who was the chairman of the London Diamond Bourse, which is a very, very prominent position. You know, if you're American, how do you explain that? Sort of like president of the New York Stock Exchange, except it's the chairman, not the president. It's London, not New York, and it's diamonds, not stocks, and it's bourse, not an exchange. But it's exactly like that. So at any rate, Freddie Hager met the Rebbe when he was in his 20s, when he was a young man. And I'm going to tell you the punchline of the story before I tell you the story. The punchline of the story is that he left his first meeting. You know, he had one of those 3 a.m. one-on-one meetings that I'm sure if you've heard stories about the Rebbe's schedule and the way that Rebbe met with people, I'm sure you've heard about people waiting in the antechamber before the Rebbe's room well into the night until dawn, and the Rebbe meeting with each individual. So his meetings were 3 a.m. At any rate, like I said, I'm going to tell you the punchline of the story first. The punchline is that Freddie Hager came out of his personal one-on-one meeting with the Rebbe. He was in his 20s. He was a kid. Who was he? Who was he? And the Rebbe gave him his time and his utmost attention and focus. Freddie Hager came out of the meeting and he said, you know, those Hasidim, they prepared me wrong for meeting with the Rebbe. I had thought I was coming to meet a great man. I left realizing that I had met my true self. Now, think about the profundity of that. That not only is there somebody who is such a visionary that he sees who you really are, and he knows you better than you know yourself. That itself is staggering. But this visionary is able to get you to see it as well, that you meet your true self. Maybe I'll tell you more of the details of the Freddie Hager story in a moment, but I just want to tag on to that. There's a letter in the Igros Kodesh that is a collection of printed letters. The Rebbe answered more correspondences than the White House. And a tip of the iceberg, a fraction of his letters are published. And one of the published letters came from a shliach. Okay, now imagine yourself in this position, in the Rebbe's position. You sent out a shliach. Now this shliach, and I'll mention where and I'll mention who it was because it's public record and also because it has to do with understanding the story. But the shliach's name was Moshe Yitzchok Hecht and the location was New Haven, Connecticut. Anyways, he was sent out. He was having a very, very difficult time. You have to understand, for a chassid, for a shliach, for a soldier to write to the Rebbe and to beg to be removed from his post is no small thing. He was obviously going through a very, very, very difficult time. And not only did he write once, he wrote twice. And in fact, I told this story in a Chabad house, and a family member of Moshe Yitzchok Hecht took me aside and said, I want you to know, he didn't only write twice, but the second time he wrote, it wasn't an envelope, it was a package, and it had all the keys to the building in the package. He sent the keys to the building to the Rebbe and said, I give up, I can't do it anymore, replace me. So that's no small matter. Now imagine you are the CEO. Imagine you are the general. You are the one, you're the visionary, you're the leader, and you sent somebody out and they're begging to be replaced. They're begging to be let off the hook. You know, just to interject for a moment, but I was at a bar mitzvah in Israel last summer, and I was talking to Jay Schottenstein, who sponsored all the Art Scroll Gemaras, and who also owns all sorts of companies, Albertsons, and a slew of other huge companies. Anyway, a very, 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 very successful businessman, to put it mildly. And I was discussing with him management styles. So I asked him, I said, obviously you don't run all your companies. I mean, you have people who run them for you. And I said, what do you look for in someone to run a company? And he said, well, you know, what do I look for is somebody who really understands what management's all about. I said, yeah, okay, what is management all about? He said, well, you know, my son once said to me, he said, Dad, I realized the whole thing, the whole objective, the goal of management is to answer one question. How do you make people care? How do you get people to care? If you know how to get people to care, then you are successful. Anyways, that struck me because obviously I started thinking about it in context of my own background, my own studies, and how do you get people to care? Well, one way is to tell them about how important the mission is. That's one way. But another way, and I think this will resonate with you as being something familiar if you've at all hung around Chabad. You know, when we go up to somebody on the street corner with tefillin and we say, excuse me, sir, are you Jewish? Do we try to tell the Jew how important tefillin and all the other mitzvahs are? Or, think about this for a second, is our approach, we try to tell the Jew how important the Jew is. We communicate the importance of the individual. And now, once we're talking about your importance, your greatness, we want to empower you with all the tools that are your birthright. So tefillin, Shabbos candles, whatever it might be, but we're not coming to sell you soap. We're not coming to tell you, oh, tefillin, you'll lose 20 pounds, you'll get fresh breath, it'll improve your life. That's not what we do. We don't tell you tefillin is great. We tell you you're great. You are a Jew. Nobody could be more Jewish than you. Your soul has infinite power. Now, if you want to express that, I've got a way for you to express it. So one approach to management is you tell somebody how important the job is, how important the task is. Another approach is tell the person how important they are, how great they are, how indispensable they are. I know one method or one approach, which is not nice, and it's not productive. Although in the short term, it whips up enough fear to get a little bit of more productivity out of people, but in the long term, it doesn't work. One way is to tell people how replaceable they are. The job is important, you're unimportant, and if you can't do it, we'll find somebody who can. I mean, it scares people and it gets a little bit of productivity in the short term. Long term, nobody builds real success that way. What do you really do to build success? You tell the person how important the job is. You tell them how important they are. Once they know how important they are, now they can do the job. In fact, not only the job, they can do any job. Once they know how great they are, they can tackle any task. So getting back to the story, Moshe Yitzchak Hecht, he writes to the Rebbe 2 times, I give up. I can't do it. Take me out of here. And the Rebbe answers him, and the answer is published in the Igros. The Rebbe says, you write to me and you say you cannot go on and you need me, the Rebbe, to do it all. The Rebbe then quotes a verse from the prophets. B'terem yikrov anochi kvar ena. Before they call out, I have already replied. The Rebbe says, before they call out, I've already replied. What you're asking for, the problem that you're complaining about, I already gave you the solution. The problem has already been solved because Moshe Yitzchak Hecht has been sent to New Haven, Connecticut. Now, who's the Rebbe writing to? He's writing to Moshe Yitzchak Hecht, who wants desperately out of New Haven, Connecticut. And the Rebbe is telling him, the solution is I already solved the problem. You know what I sent in the cavalry. I sent Moshe Yitzchak Hecht to New Haven, problem solved. Now, if you're reading the letter, you could almost think, like, does the Rebbe know who he's talking to? And then clearly the Rebbe says, the Rebbe really milks it. And he says, but you know what your real problem is. By the way, the original letter is in Hebrew, so I'm paraphrasing in English, but it's pretty close. The Rebbe says, but you know what your real problem is. That you have not met Moshe Yitzchak Hecht. And that is why my best advice to you is that you should meet him. And when you do, all of your problems in life will disappear. So, I mean, that's what Freddie Hager said. The Hasidim didn't prepare me well. I thought the Rebbe is a great man. I'm going to meet a great man. I left my one-on-one audience realizing that I had met my true self. You know, there's a shul in Krakow, Poland called Itzik's Shul. And it has a history to it. Itzik's Shul was built by a guy named, you want to guess? Itzik, yes. You know who's buried in Grant's tomb? Yeah, okay. But I don't know if you guys still use that joke. When I was growing up in the 70s, that was considered hilarious. Who's buried in Grant's tomb? Okay. So who built Itzik's Shul? Itzik. Now, who was Itzik? Itzik was a guy from Krakow. And every night of his life, he was a poor and simple Jew, but every night of his life, he had a vivid dream that he was in Prague, a city where he had never been. And that in Prague, he would find this castle. And next to the castle was a moat, and over the moat was a bridge, and under the bridge, he would dig and he'd find a treasure. Every night in his dream, he would discover this treasure. And as he was getting older, he decided, you know, I have to really just, I can't let this go unexplored. I have to just make the trip. I have to see what's there in Prague.
We have nothing.
And so he spent his life savings and he made the arduous journey. And the old man, Itzik, he went all the way to Prague. And he was shocked when he got to Prague. He found the castle there. He'd never been to Prague. But the castle looked just like he always saw it in his dream. And he got closer. The moat was always like it was in his dream. Every night in his dream, this was the moat. And the bridge was over the moat. And under the bridge, there was the very spot that he had seen every night of his life in his dream. And he was ready to dig. And the guard says to him, what are you doing? So he decides honesty is the best policy. He says to the guard, listen, every night of my life, I have a dream that I come to Prague and I see the castle and I see the moat and I see the bridge and I dig and I get the treasure. I had to see if it was true. And the guard laughs and he says, "You foolish Jew. If everyone were as crazy as you, do you know where I would be right now? I have a recurring dream. Every night of my life, I dream I'm in Krakow, Poland, a city where I've never been. And in Krakow, I'm in the Jewish quarter, where I can assure you I would never step foot. And in the Jewish quarter, I'm at a particular house, and he describes the outside of the house. And then I go into the house, and he describes the inside of the house. And there's a stove. And I push the stove. And under the stove, where the stove used to be, there's a loose floorboard. And I pick up the loose floorboard, and there's a box full of treasure, and I become rich every night in my dream. But you don't see me picking up and going to Krakow and going to the Jewish quarter and going to some house and moving the stove and picking up floorboards and looking for treasures that don't exist." And Itzik says, "I think I forgot something at home." And he turns around and he runs back to Krakow, goes back to his home where he's lived his entire life, pushes the stove, lifts up the floorboard, he finds his box of treasure, and he becomes rich. This is it's a story. Itzik Shul is a real place. You can go visit in Krakow, but it's also a parable. What's the parable? Sometimes we're sitting on the treasure. Our whole lives we can be sitting on our treasure, our potential, and we don't know it. How do we discover our own potential? Okay, sometimes there are situations that bring it out of us. God shouldn't test us, but sometimes a test. Sometimes push comes to shove and we realize we have more strength than we knew we did. But I'll tell you another way that we find our own potential. The story is there was a group of college students from the University of Manitoba. And they were from the Hillel house at University of Manitoba. And the Hillel rabbi, brought them to Brooklyn, to Crown Heights, to 770 to meet the Rebbe. And one of the college kids, not really knowing about decorum and respect and how to speak to a Rebbe, he said very sort of off the cuff, he said, "So what's a Rebbe good for anyway?" And the rabbi was mortified. He was really, really embarrassed that the college student was speaking so disrespectfully. He says, however, the Rebbe took it very much in stride. He wasn't visibly, at least, he wasn't offended one bit. And the Rebbe said to him, "Well, that's a good question. What is a Rebbe good for?" And the Rebbe told this young man, he says, "You know, I can't tell you about myself, but I can tell you about my Rebbe. My father-in-law is my Rebbe. And I can tell you about him. I can tell you what a Rebbe is based on my father-in-law. A Rebbe is a soul geologist." What's a soul geologist? Well, what's a regular geologist? You know where geologists work? I mean, other than geologists who teach geology. But if you want to get a real job in the private sector as a geologist, you know who hires you? Mining companies. And it pays very, very well. What does a geologist do? The Rebbe tells this college kid, the earth, our earth is full of endless natural resources, boundless, precious natural resources. Treasure. The thing is, it's not just anywhere. You have to have a plan. You have to know where you're going. So you hire a geologist. The geologist is the one who knows what to dig for and where to dig. So too, the Rebbe says, every soul is full of treasure, boundless resources, infinite really. But you need a soul geologist, an expert, to tell you what to dig for and where to dig. That's a Rebbe, a soul geologist. So let me bring it back again, how I started. Godliness is infinity. A godly perspective is an infinite perspective. Infinity isn't just bigger than big, it's also smaller than small. A godly perspective, a godly vision, is not just one that can aspire to the greatest heights, the greatest goals, nothing less than world peace and perfection. But at the same time, and as you see, they're one and the same, put the man together, the whole world falls into place. At the same time, to focus on the individual, on the person across from you right now, as if there's nothing else in the world, as if they are the entire world, and to help bring out in that person their greatness. But there's more. A real leader who makes leaders, which is a visionary who makes visionaries, is not just somebody who knows about your hidden greatness and instructs you accordingly. You know, that would be enough if somebody knew your greatness. And they wouldn't even necessarily tell you what your greatness is, but they would give you guidance at least so that the tasks that you would be going to accomplish would be ones that play to your strengths. That itself would be wonderful. But no, it's more than that. Not only that they see your greatness, but they get you to see your greatness. They get you to see your greatness. A real leader, a real visionary, is one who can see the greatness of human resources, the endless treasure in the soul geologist. And to get every person that he or she connects with to see that in themselves. But I want to take it one step further. If you're following me, I hope you're following me. I want to take it one step further. One step further. It's not just that the visionary sees each individual's greatness. Dayenu, that would be enough. And it's not just that the visionary gets you to see your own greatness. Dayenu, that would be enough. But there's one more step to it. And maybe you can already see where I'm going. What did the Rebbe get his followers to do? Followers who are really leaders, who are really visionaries in their own right. What did the Rebbe teach those who embraced his worldview? What did he teach them to do? What did the Rebbe teach other people to do? Not only to see their own greatness, but tagger it to see the greatness instill other people. I mean, what's a shliach? Is somebody who didn't know that he was great enough to do this job. In fact, he was sure he wasn't. And the Rebbe said, no, you are great enough to do it. And now what's your job? Is to figure out how each person you meet should see in turn their own greatness. That's a visionary. That's a leader. That everyone you meet, and imagine the way that not just your success in your career, but your life, your relationships would be if everyone you meet will leave an interaction with you feeling, wow, I just met a great person, and that great person is myself. Trust me when I say that's a lot more impressive than people leaving an interaction with you and saying, I met a great person, that great person is so-and-so. Okay, so you're a great person. They think of you as a great person. But if you can get people to realize their own greatness because of an interaction with you, that is a bond. That is a connection. First of all, that will last forever. If you teach somebody who they really are, that's more important than any piece of information you could teach them. Because now everything else they know and everything else they do is through the lens of that self-concept. That's first of all. Second of all, you magnify your impact. You magnify your impact because now it's not just that you're a great person who can get other people to do great things. You get other people to come up with more great things. And they meet other people and get those people to be visionaries as well and to come up with more great things. And one by one, the ripple effect is that everybody not only is doing something great, but everyone becomes a visionary. Everybody understands the big picture, the world goal. And then it becomes very, very clear how the individual greatness, put the man together, the world falls into place, how individual greatness culminates in changing the entire world. So that's it. That's what I want you to think about, is to be able to see the tininess, the particulars, the details, every interaction, every individual, and to seize that as an opportunity to help people, to guide people, to get in touch with their own greatness. If you can do that, if you have that ability, then you will be a true influencer. You will be a true mover and a shaker. And then whatever it is that you care about will be accomplished that much faster, that much more smoothly, that much more pleasantly. Especially since I know that at the end of the day, the one thing that we all care about and the one thing that we all know is the thing that's most important is we didn't Mashiach already. So whatever it is that you're talented at, the bottom line is all of us are working toward that one goal. We're trying to perfect the world, trying to bring Mashiach, trying to put an end to this, all this struggle and this heartache, and bring in already an era where it'll be good for everybody for forever and ever. So keep that in mind. You are great. Make other people great. And have fun on your trip.